Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Clint with the Scottish Clans. Yes, I am with them, and I am glad that you are with me today. I hope you, in this effort that you are expressing by watching this video of getting close to your ancestors, connecting with your heritage, I hope you are finding a deep and immense amount of joy from that, as I have. I'm glad that you've joined me today, and to start off, we're going to play a little game. I'm going to be discussing 5 clans that, contrary to popular belief, not all Highland clans joined the Jacobite cause during the Jacobite rebellions of the early 1700s. So, we're going to discuss these 5 clans that were an exception to that. Now, this is not an exhaustive list. There were more clans than this. These are the ones that I'm choosing to highlight. And I have pictures of the castles that were the primary strongholds of their chiefs here. So for those of you castle experts, this is a little quiz. And for anybody else, I'm going to put the one by one, I'm going to display the castles. And I want you to see how many of them you can identify. And as you do this, I want you, if you need to pause the video and put it down in the comments. I want to know how many you got right. Were you 3 for 5, 0 for 5? Still put that in there. Say, hey, I'm just starting out. Get off my back. I didn't know any of them, okay? And we'll cut you some slack. And we're just going to assume that everybody who responded in the comments that did so fairly without having the names given to them and then going back and putting the names of the castles in. Also, if you see names of castles, they're in the comments. Don't assume they're the correct ones. You might be copying somebody else's incorrect work, which we call that's an old lesson, right? All right, here we go. Without any further delay, here's the castles. There's the first one. We're going to call that number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. Now, once again, go ahead and pause if you need to. Which castles are those? Do you know any of them? Because those are the castles where the chiefs of the clans that we're talking about today lived. Let's keep going. Little background on what we're talking about today. We're talking about a struggle between 2 dynasties for the throne of what becomes the UK, the United Kingdom. And it becomes that right in here. There was one side, the Stuarts, got kindly excused from the throne. And it didn't happen all at once. There's another group in between, and that was this conflict here. But then the rest of these were between the House of Hanover and the House of Stuart. One side trying to keep the Hanoverians on the throne, the other side trying to bring the Stuarts back to the throne to regain it. All right? And James, if they had won, the Jacobites, then this guy's dad would have been James the 8th of Scotland and the 3rd of England. And he was represented, the family was represented by his son Charles Edward Stuart, also known as, who was it? That's right, Bonnie Prince Charlie. So actually George I was on the throne for the 1715 rebellion, and then George II was on the throne for these two here. So it's a fight between these two. The Jacobite clans, that comes from James in Latin being Jacob or Jacobus, and so they called themselves Jacobites, and so they were in favor of the Stuarts. And the rest of them, government, Whig, Hanoverians. I'm going to favor the term Hanoverians. I was actually corrected on a podcast episode a couple years ago by somebody saying, hey, they weren't Hanoverians. It was the government. The Hanoverians were the government. It was the government troops, which I'm not saying that's wrong, but here's another perspective. And if you disagree or agree with me, put it down in the comments, and explain your case, because I think the comments are a really interesting classroom. My view on that is, wouldn't the Jacobites have thought that they were fighting for who they thought should be the rightful head of the government? So from their perspective, they were government troops. Yeah? No? No? Am I way off? Let me know. And the best place to let me know is down there in the comments. All right, so you have the Hanoverians and the Jacobites or the Stuarts. Those are the two main sides. The clans we're going to talk about today sided with the Hanoverians to keep them in place. There's a lot of reasons that they did, but before we learn those reasons, we're going to look at the clans that we're going to be talking about. Now, one of the reasons I'm making this video is because it seems like there's this romantic undercurrent as you study Scottish history that if your folks didn't support the Jacobites, they weren't Highlanders. They weren't true Highlanders. The real Highlanders, the real Gaels, stuck with the House of Stuart, despite how crappy their relationship with the Stuarts had been earlier. Now, there's reasons for that, but I disagree with that premise. And that's why I'm highlighting these 5 clans today, is to show that, no, there was legit Highland clans on both sides. And the probably numerically, the Highland clans were more Jacobite than Hanoverian, but the ones that were on the Hanoverian side were pretty big deals. And so they might have contributed disproportionately than a small clan like the Chisholms, who sided with the Jacobites. We don't have any. Yeah. Anyway, well, I'll let you. Well, I'm gonna display the shields, the heraldic shields of the chiefs of these 5 clans. Can you get them? Can you identify them? Who's that? Which clan is that? What about that one? The comments, or if you need to pause this, but I'm gonna say who they are right now. We have, going from left to right, the clan Sutherland. We have clan Munro, the eagle's head on there. In the middle, the only blue one, the Mackays of Strathnaver, not to be confused with other Mackays in Scotland, unrelated. Also, clan Ross, also not to be confused with other Rosses in other parts of Scotland. And clan Grant. All right, so there's your 5 clans. I'm going to briefly, just super brief, touch on each clan, and then share at the end of this video clan. If you look back and read about some rebellions that happened in the 1100s into the early 1200s, you'll see a group of people known as the Mackeths. Well, linguistically, the Mackeths and Mackay, they're all English versions of this Gaelic name right here, Mackay. I'm trying my best with the Gaelic guys. Let me know how I did if you are a Gaelic speaker. And if you are a Gaelic speaker, I am so flattered that you are watching this. All right, so same group. And when the last of their rebellions fail, they push from this area near where present-day Inverness is, and they push farther north and settle way up on the north coast of Scotland. They eventually will inhabit a very large territory and become a very strong clan up there. Until the early 1600s, they had been enemies with one of these other 5 clans, the Sutherlands. And in the genealogical history of the earldom of Sutherland, which is written in the 1600s, it details these conflicts. Also, another good source for this is the Book of Mackay, written by Angus Mackay. And free PDF links are available over on scottishclans.info. Anyway, they patched up their differences and became allies, and by the time the Jacobite rebellions happened, they're on the same page, more or less. That's the Mackays, the Sutherlands, their ancestors Freskin, who was given lands to help quell these rebellions from these crazy northern people up here. He was likely of Flemish descent, settled up here so that he could help keep an eye on things after they'd put down those rebellions. Now, the interesting thing here with the Sutherlands is that their chiefs were actually Gordons from as far back as the early 1500s. There was an heiress. It's a long story. I went into it in early podcast episodes about clans and earldoms that have the same name. And each of them have a different story about how that is. In this case, you have the Earldom of Sutherland and you have a clan Sutherland. And the Earldom of Sutherland goes to Adam Gordon, younger son of the 2nd Earl of Huntly. And so he becomes a new Earl of Sutherland. He's Gordon, but he's the Earl of Sutherland. And he becomes leader of the clan. And there's a story behind that, and I go into it in that podcast episode. So if you want more detail, go back to that. It's in one of the earlier podcast episodes. So these chiefs of Clan Sutherland actually keep the Gordon surname for 200 years. And the only reason they changed it as we go into the Jacobite rebellions is because their cousins, the Earls of Huntly, chose the Jacobite side, and they wanted to create a little distance there. So they finally adopted the Sutherland surname. And they were a big, huge deal. They're very powerful in this part of Scotland. So for each one of these clans, you can see there's a pattern. I try to include a picture of what that territory, or at least a piece of their territory, would have looked like. Their shield, once again, and the map that kind of gives you some idea of where they're at. Clan Ross here, descendants of a super hardcore warlord, Ferricker MacIntaggart O'Beolon. Now, that's a long name, and let me break it down real quick. Ferricker, the son of the priest. That wasn't a surname. His dad was a priest. The O'Beolons, this is the surname, they were an ecclesiastical family. Okay, so that's the surname. Ferricker, son of the priest, O'Beolon. was his name. He helped suppress one of these Mackay rebellions, and he actually delivered the heads of the leaders of the rebellion to the Scottish king, for which he was knighted, and then later became the Earl of Ross, which may have been vacated by those same Mackays as they pushed farther north and left a vacuum of power, which was filled by this group of people who were originally called Obiolan, but would eventually change their name to Ross. So Ferriker becomes the Earl of Ross. The next 2 or 3 generations keep the name Obiolan, after which it's changed. They adopt the name Ross as a surname. Little side note, you have a clan MacTaggart, and I actually know some people by the last name of Taggart back in Idaho. Good people. And they were a branch of this clan that would have adopted that as their surname. And I just discovered another group in the same area, same part of Scotland anyway, the MacFarkers, near Redcastle. I'd never come across them before, but found them as I studying up for this. And I wondered if they're not Farquharsons of Invercald in that area, part of Clanhattan. Different group. Looks like they're a different group completely. But they were Jacobites. So this guy's awesome. That's what you need to pull away from them. Ferriker, MacTaggart, Obiolan's awesome. His descendants are not only the Earls of Ross, but the chiefs of Clan Ross. That, similar to the Earldom of Sutherland, goes out of the family through an heiress to the Leslies. Now, unlike the Sutherlands, the Rosses don't accept the Leslies as their chief. They just go to that last Earl, the last actual Ross Earl, and they go to his brother, and from him descend the chiefs of Clan Ross. So at this part, we see the Clan Ross and the Earldom of Ross as entities diverge. And then eventually, the Leslies run out of male heirs, and MacDonalds and Stuarts, who had both married heiresses, are fighting over who gets the Earldom of Ross. You can see it's gigantic. Not all of that red was Clan Ross territory, by the way. That was just this northern chunk. Still a pretty good chunk, but not all of that red. But that's how you get this conflict between the MacDonalds and the Stuarts, how you get the Battle of Harlaw in 1411. And yeah, so that's all I'm going to say about the Clan Ross. Let's keep moving. The Clan Munro, who claim descent from an O'Cahan or an O'Cahain in Northern Ireland, but DNA disproves that. The DNA does confirm an Irish origin, but it's Southern Ireland, not Northern Ireland, which is crazy. So like Southern Ireland's Northern Ireland's a hop, skip, and a jump. It's visible from Scotland. But Southern Ireland's, that's a different story. And so there's probably some cool story there that I don't know, but can't wait to learn someday. But what DNA does confirm is that a couple of very famous U.S. residents who go by the name Munro, but that doesn't for sure tie you into the clan, as I talked about in an earlier video. But it does confirm it here. DNA confirmed Marilyn Monroe and early U.S. President James Monroe are, no kidding, descended from members of Clan Ross. That's kind of cool. And Clan Grant, a little more spectacular entry there. Clan Grant, they're the farthest south. If you notice, we've moved from north to south in this order. And Clan Grant, there's like 3 different origin stories for them, and I don't agree with any of them. At least I think they're based on pretty shaky ground. So if you want me to go into more detail on that in a future video, please let me know in the comments, and maybe I'll do a little bit deeper dive of Clan Grant. I did do a podcast episode a while ago on Shiel Alpen. Shiel is a Gaelic word that means the seed of or descendants of. And so that the Grants were one of those groups. It's a long story. I'm not going to get into it on this, but I did. If you want more information, go back on there. But if you want me to make a video on it, let me know in the comments. Now, one notable fact about Clan Grant is that a pretty significant branch of the Grants of Glen Moriston, joined the Jacobite side. So there's something interesting. All right, that's my short little, I hope that was good enough and that we went fast enough for that, but that's our 5 clans, little intro to the 5 clans. Now, what we want to do here is go over 4 things that all these clans had in common that contributed to them joining the Hanoverian side, or the government side, for those of you who are particular about it. The first one was religion. Now, I don't like making hard rules and putting things in tidy boxes because I found myself on the wrong side of history too many times by doing that. However, the Stuarts, at the time that they were excused from the British throne, and at the time that these Jacobite clans are trying to get them back onto it, are Catholics. And so Catholic clans, and by that I mean specifically the chiefs who are still Catholic and had not converted to some form of Protestantism, those tended to side with the Stuarts and become Jacobites. And the fact that all 5 of these clans that we've been discussing, yes, all 5 of them were Presbyterians, at least the chiefs were. And the chiefs and the upper gentry, the dinuousel of the clan, those are the ones who are making the decisions here. So, yes, they're all Presbyterian, Protestant clans, and that's a huge reason why they want the Hanoverians to stay on the throne, because the Hanoverians were Protestants as well. Now, this is a really interesting feature here. Previous alliances and previous feuds were given government sanction, just as different factions during the American Civil War and even the Revolutionary War. Same thing happened to those, and probably this has happened all over the world throughout history. You already had beef with these guys over here, and you were already friends with these guys over here. And that did strongly influence what side people took in conflicts. And so here we have these clans. Now, like I said, the Mackays had conflicts in earlier generations with both the Sutherlands and the Rosses, but here their directions have aligned and they find themselves in harmony going into the early 1700s. And so those alliances contributed to this. And likewise, the feuds that they had, an example of this would be the Mackenzies. The Mackenzies were pretty powerful. And that, whenever you become that powerful, you're bumping up against other guys who disagree, maybe think they should be the top dogs, or whatever the nature of the feud is. The Mackenzies had been at odds with several of these clans, if not all of them, previous to the Jacobite rebellions. The Mackenzies were vigorous Jacobites, as you saw from my thumbnail, included a little Dougal Mackenzie there. And if you know that story and watched that show, you'll know that it starts off right neck deep in this world that we're talking about here. And so those feuds were amplified as we go into these conflicts. Now, I do want to make one little caveat on the alliances part of this. That is that not all of the clans that were allied and on friendly and good terms with these 5 clans chose the same side. An example of that were the Chisholms. They tended to be on friendly terms with the Munros and Rosses, yet chose to be Jacobites instead. And there's probably some good storylines there. And if you come from a Chisholm background or have happened to otherwise study that, illuminate us, please, in the comments. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about is something that is actually going to provide us more content in the future. Yes, I do intend to talk more about independent Highland companies in the very near future. In fact, I've had conversations earlier today with a very close friend of mine named Dane, who we go back to came to be good friends in the same Army Reserve unit. And he has dived into this subject of the independent Highland companies a little bit more than I have. So I'm just going to give you a touch of it here and then leave it wide open for him to teach us better in the future. The independent Highland companies were formed. The government had been experimenting with these for a while before the 1700s. And as we come into the mid to late 1600s, we see the development of groups. The idea was that the government would use natives to do their policing. They're basically like military police. And they would patrol the Highlands. And because they were natives, they were Gaelic-speaking native kindreds who knew the terrain, not only physically, the actual natural terrain, but they knew the social terrain as well, and could perform their functions better because of that knowledge. And that concept's the whole idea behind the part of the Army known as civil affairs, in the U.S. anyway. But all 5 of these clans had participated in some form or another with the formation of independent Highland companies. So that is significant. The 1715 rebellion really showed the Hanoverians who of these Highland clans could be trusted to be on their side. So in between the 1715 and 1745 rebellion, there had been a formation at the instigation of Duncan Forbes of Culloden, who happened to be the uncle of the chief of the Rosses. And he was a pretty important guy in this part of Scotland, this Inverness area. Culloden was, my understanding is that the Battle of Culloden was fought on his land. and he was already sporting the title of Culloden, this branch of the Forbes clan. Anyway, he had recommended, hey, let's make this official. Let's not mess around with it anymore. Let's just actually go full send with using natives drawn from the clans of the Highlands who are loyal to the government, the current government, and let's give them commissions and let's let them run. And so a lot of people, when they look at the term independent Highland companies, they're thinking that this is government stuff, not necessarily clan stuff. And I don't know why we have to think it's either or. So these commissioned officers who are commanding these units are men from these loyal clans. If it's not the chief, it's one of their higher ranking members and officers from within the clan. And where do you think they're recruiting from? I'm not telling you that 100% of the people on their roster were actual kin to them, but I'm saying they're going to the clan to recruit. And it would be really hard if you had the roster in front of you, the roll, the muster roll, by looking at the surnames. And I explained why that's misleading in a previous video, 2 videos ago, on how to find your clan. So if you want to see me go into pretty good detail about why looking at surnames might be misleading about who is a member of what clan, go to that video and check that out. Anyway, all 5 of these clans had participated in this, and by the time of the 1745 rebellion, they'd had a few reps as with these independent Highland companies and being involved in that idea. And so they're already, so the members of their clan are already British officers. Like, no kidding. Not hey, I'm the chief's nephew, and so I'm getting a commission. No, they're actual British officers. So they're kind of invested in the British Army, which adds a lot of weight to them choosing the Hanoverian side. I think that detail cannot be overlooked. And I think something that we could just maybe encapsulate all of these 4 topics here is that there is a way that things were going and a stability that the clans who chose the Hanoverian side wanted to maintain that would be disrupted by a change of regime. So there you have it. If you have a desire to dive into this further, I have over on scottishclans.info a list of Amazon books that have been very helpful for me. So go over there and check some of those Amazon links out. But if you want to know exactly which books I have really benefited from, I've got links to free PDFs. Some of the sources I've mentioned earlier here, you can find them in PDF form for a free download if you want to do that. If you want some maps that have been super helpful for me, let me actually show you. Actually, as I screen record this, I got rid of it, but I've developed a bunch of maps that have been very helpful for me to see geographic, spatial awareness, that kind of idea. So go over to scottishclans.info. If you want to reach out to me personally, it's thescottishclans@gmail.com. If you're planning a trip to Scotland in the very near future, make sure you click the email address below and it's to Scotland History Tours, and that's how to get Bruce Fumi to be involved at some point in your trip. You will not be disappointed. He's super knowledgeable and a great storyteller. Make sure you include him in your experience. And that's what I've got for you today. Hopefully this has been beneficial. Please let me know if it has. Please let me know if there's any point that we've touched along here that you want me to go deeper into in a future video. Martian Lev and the rest.